Hi, and welcome once again to the Scammed channel, helping scam-proof your life. In this video, we're going to travel back in time and discover a long-forgotten hoax, but one that became the biggest of the 19th century. This story is brought to you from the book Scammed, which showcases some of the world's greatest scams, cons and hoaxes, both new and old, and it is narrated by the author, Cloete. The term, "there's a sucker born every minute," refers to how gullible some people can be, which potentially leads to them becoming a victim of a scam or a hoax. It is a common misconception that the term arose from the lips of pioneer circus showman and marketing conman P.T. Barnum, but the root of the saying, although connected to Barnum, is much more interesting. Barnum's name is correctly synonymous with the development of the big top circus in America, but his rise to fame and fortune was paved with successful scams and hoaxes. Phineas Taylor Barnum, in his early years, used to host weird and wonderful exhibitions, many of them people including conjoined twins, hairy women, and perhaps his most famous, General Tom Thumb. Tom Thumb's real name was Charles Stratton, and Barnum took Stratton, whose parents were first cousins, under his wing and taught him to impersonate and act characters like Cupid, Baby Hercules, and even Napoleon. The child star became a sensation. Queen Victoria and even the Tsar of Russia were entertained by him. Despite the fact that Stratton was merely a child, Barnum had him drinking and smoking in his pre-teen years in order to appear more adult-like. As an adult, Stratton met and married Lavinia Warren, and Barnum used the opportunity to promote the wedding as the event of the decade, and sold tens of thousands of tickets for a whopping $75, a staggering amount in 1863. President Abraham Lincoln received Barnum and the newlyweds at a post-wedding reception at the White House in Washington, D.C. One of Barnum's earlier deceptions was to exhibit a creature that had a human head and the body of a fish. It became known as the Fiji Mermaid, and advertisements published in newspapers across America included text describing how the mermaid had been caught by a Dr. J. Griffin. Dr. Griffin, of course, was completely fictitious. However, plenty of people were prepared to pay a handsome fee to witness the world's only physical example of a mermaid, to discover later that it was indeed a fake. In actual fact, the Fiji mermaid was the head and torso of a baby monkey sewn together with the back half of a fish, and then padded with papier mâché. Even after Barnum had had a change of conscience and admitted to many of his frauds, deceptions and scams, including the Fiji mermaid in his autobiography, The Life of P.T. Barnum, he was still very popular with the public. The British Examiner, a tabloid of the day, described his book as trashy and offensive, saying it inspired nothing but sensations of disgust and sincere pity for the wretched man who compiled it. Despite this less than glowing review, Barnum's book went on to become the second biggest best-selling book of the 1800s, second only to the New Testament. Barnum always claimed that he wasn't scamming the public with his Fiji mermaid. He maintained that he was using a marketing ploy to create hype and draw the crowd in, and then keep them entertained. He perhaps hypocritically was contemptuous of those who made money through fraudulent deceptions, especially the spiritualist mediums popular in his day. In his book, The Humbugs of the World, Barnum exposed many of the tricks of the trade used by mediums to cheat the bereaved. In addition, he offered $500 American to any medium who could prove their claim of being able to communicate with the dead, an offer that was repeated and upped by several prominent showmen over the next 100 years, including Harry Houdini and, more recently, James Randi. The prize currently stands at $1 million and to date has never been claimed. In 1868, New York tobacconist George Hull decided to create an artificial giant and pass it off as real, a kind of petrified man. He got the idea after he entered into a heated discussion with the revivalist minister about whether giants had existed or not. The minister assured Hull that despite the lack of any physical evidence, in Genesis 6:4, it proclaims absolutely that giants once roamed the earth. This sparked a wild idea that was to make Hull an absolute fortune. He presumed, and correctly, that if a giant were to be in fact discovered, it would trigger huge public interest and ultimately money. His first task was to source the materials, and under the pretense that he was looking to immortalize the great Abraham Lincoln, he bought a huge block of gypsum. He had the 3-metre-long block delivered to Chicago, where he had already commissioned a German stonecutter to carve it into the likeness of a naked man. The giant had to look weathered and old, so various stains and acids were introduced onto the surface. The giant also had to look as if it had once lived, so to give it extra realism, sharp steel was knocked against the surface to simulate skin pores. Finally, the giant had to be buried, albeit temporarily. Hull's cousin conveniently had a farm in Cardiff, New York, and this was chosen as the location. In complete secrecy, the 1.4-ton giant was railed to the farm and buried in a pit in November 1868. Despite having spent a small fortune on creating the hoax, Hull knew that every successful scam needs patience. Timing would be everything. Nearly a year later, William Newell, Hull's cousin and now a partner in the scam, hired a few men to dig a well in the exact spot where the giant lay. Now, all Hull and Newell had to do was wait the inevitable. On the 16th of October, 1869, the well diggers discovered what was become the most famous and sensational find of the century. After starting on the well dig, they hit stone about 1 metre down. Clearing the soil, they noticed the shape of a foot, and soon unearthed the colossal figure. Almost immediately, word broke, and people started to arrive to see the giant in his grave. Already prepared, Newell had set up a tent over the giant and started charging people who wanted to see it 25 cents, a fee that doubled to 50 cents just 2 days later when the crowds intensified and interest in the discovery was growing exponentially. Andrew White, the first president of Cornell University, like many learned men who travelled to view the giant personally, declared the giant a hoax. To these men, the giant was obviously a carved statue, and not a very good one at that, and certainly not a giant petrified man. There was also no logical reason to have built a well in the spot where the giant was found, which gave further credence to their assertion that the whole discovery had been artificially staged. Despite this professional vilification of the giant, White recalls overhearing a prominent pastor from the largest church in the neighbouring Syracuse proclaiming, "No one can deny the fact that here we have a fossilized human being, perhaps one of the giants mentioned in Scripture." Therefore it was, wrote White in his memoirs, that, in spite of all scientific reasons to the contrary, the work was very generally accepted as a genuine, petrified human being of colossal size, and it became known as the Cardiff Giant. So Hull's gamble, based on the religious argument that he had had over a year previously, paid off, and the devout became his greatest promoters. Hull, fearful that his fakery would eventually be proven, sold his giant forgery for the monstrous sum of $23,000 to a syndicate headed by David Hunnam, who excavated the giant and moved it to Syracuse, New York, for exhibition. The giant drew such crowds that showman P.T. Barnum volunteered twice the price that they had paid for the giant. The syndicate turned him down. They were just making too much money. So Barnum hired an artist to visit the exhibit, secretly take measurements, and when able, model the giant's shape in wax. Thus, an exact plaster replica was manufactured by P.T. Barnum, and he placed it proudly on display at a museum in New York, claiming that his was the real Cardiff Giant and that Hannam's was a fake. Barnum was of such reputation that the masses believed him, and they flocked to see the fake original. Knowing absolutely that Barnum's giant was a fake, and he couldn't believe how people were lining up to see it, led Hannam to utter the now famous line, "There is a sucker born every minute." Hannam sought an injunction against Barnum and tried to sue him for suggesting that Hannam's giant was a fake. But by now the world was starting to wise up to the forgery. Yale paleontologist O.C. Marsh wrote a scathing denunciation of the Cardiff Giant. "It is of very recent origin," he wrote, "and a most decided humbug." To call something or someone humbug was the absolute worst insult of the day. In the meantime, Hull, perhaps to swell his own ego at the successful deception, took ownership of his scam and declared to the press in detail how he had managed to fool the world. It was no wonder then that on the 2nd of February 1870 both giants were declared fake in court, and the final ruling of the judge was that Barnum could not be sued for calling a fake a fake. This story and the fascinating stories about many others are taken from the book Scammed, now out at leading bookstores or online. If you want to find out more about cons, hoaxes and scams, both old and new, then this is absolutely your one-stop shop in securing the first step in scam-proofing your life.